The Old Man Who Made the Flowers Bloom, a Japanese folktale for sleep. Close your eyes if you'd like, or simply let your gaze go soft, restin' on nothing in particular. Let your body settle wherever you are. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest open and still. There's nothing you need to do right now, nothing to hold on to. For the next little while, you are simply here, listening and resting. Tonight, we are going to a village in Japan, a quiet village, a small one, the kind of village that existed in the mountains and valleys of Japan for hundreds of years, where the houses were close together and the people knew each other's names, and the seasons arrived one after another with the particular reliability that people in such places have always depended on. This is one of the oldest kinds of Japanese stories, a story about kindness, and what kindness makes possible, and the particular way that the world around us sometimes responds to the quality of what we bring to it. It is a story about a dog and the old man who loved him, about a tree stripped bare by winter, and what happens when the right person stands beneath it with the right kind of ash in their hands, about the moment when what was dead becomes suddenly, unexpectedly alive, when the blossoms open where no blossoms were possible, and the world stops for just a moment in its turning to notice. Breathe in slowly and let it out. Let the day go. There is nowhere else to be tonight but here, in this quiet village, watching the snow melt and the first light of spring begin. There was once an old man who lived at the edge of a village with his wife and their dog. The dog's name was Shiro. The word means white, and white was what he was, entirely, from the tip of his nose to the end of his tail, the kind of white that is not simply the absence of color, but seems to carry its own quality of light, the white of fresh snow or the white of the first cherry blossoms, before the petals have had any time to take on the warmth of the sun. The old man had found him years ago when Shiro was not yet grown, a small white shape at the edge of the road in the rain, shivering, uncertain, the kind of creature that has not yet decided whether the world is something to be trusted. The old man had stopped. He had looked at the small dog for a moment, looked at the wetness of the fur, the particular way the dog was holding himself with a careful stillness that is different from calm, the stillness of something that is waiting to see what happens next. Then he had bent down and picked the dog up and put him inside his jacket and carried him home. His wife had looked at the small, wet creature that her husband brought through the door. She had not said, "Why did you bring that home?" She had said, "Put him by the fire, he's cold." And that was that. Shiro grew. He became the kind of dog that is entirely at home in a particular place, that has made one house the center of his world, and one person the center of that center, and who expresses this not through any dramatic performance, but through the simple constancy of being wherever you are, of following you from room to room, of waiting at the door with the particular quality of waiting that only dogs have, which is complete and uncomplicated and entirely without resentment. The old man loved him, not in the abstract way of a person who values the concept of a pet, but in the specific way of a person who has spent years with a particular creature and has learned its particular ways and has become, in some sense, known by it in return. Shiro knew the old man's footsteps from a distance, could distinguish them from other footsteps on the path outside the house, and would rise and go to the door before the man himself appeared. The old man knew Shiro's sounds, the particular bark that meant something interesting outside, the different sound that meant something alarming, the soft sound that meant nothing in particular except that Shiro was there, and the old man was there, and both of them were exactly where they should be. Dogs have lived alongside people in Japan for a very long time. Archaeological evidence places dogs among the inhabitants of the Japanese archipelago as far back as the Jomon period, the long prehistoric era that lasted roughly from 14,000 years ago to 300 years before the Common Era, making the relationship between dogs and people in Japan one of the oldest continuous relationships of its kind anywhere in the world. The dogs of the Jomon period were not the domesticated companion animals of the modern imagination, were not the particular breeds that have been developed over centuries for particular purposes and particular aesthetics, but they were dogs, living in close proximity to human settlements, sharing food and fire and whatever else the people of that time shared with the animals they kept near them. Over the millennia that followed, the relationship deepened and diversified. Different kinds of dogs for different kinds of work. Hunting dogs, herding dogs, the dogs that guarded houses and the dogs that accompanied travelers, and the dogs that simply lived in the ordinary way of household animals, doing the fundamental thing that dogs have always done in human households, being present. In Japanese folklore, dogs appear frequently in the role they play in this story, as animals whose loyalty extends beyond death, whose attachment to the people they loved persists in some form after the body is gone, manifesting in dreams and visions, and the unexpected behavior of natural things. This is not unique to Japanese tradition. Many cultures have stories of the faithful dog, whose devotion survives death. But in Japan, the idea has a particular resonance, connected to the broader belief in the continued presence of the dead among the living, in the thinness of the boundary between this world and the next, in the capacity of love to cross that boundary in both directions. Shiro is this kind of dog. His loyalty does not end when his life ends. What he had found for the old man in life, the coins in the field, he continues to find for him after death. The abundance in the mortar, the blossoms from the ash. The story moves through his absence, carried by the energy of his presence. The things he gave before he died, continuing to give, long after he was gone. One morning Shiro led the old man to the field, not urgently, not with the frantic energy of a dog who has found something alarming, but with the particular insistence of a dog who knows where he is going and wants the person he is with to come along. He stopped at a place in the field, an ordinary place, no different in appearance from any other part of the field, and he began to scratch at the ground. The old man watched. Then he understood, or felt he understood, that something was being shown to him, that the scratching was not random but pointed, that Shiro was trying to tell him something specific about this specific place. He went and got his spade. He began to dig. The earth in the field was the earth of a Japanese mountain village, heavy and dark, with the particular density of soil that has been worked for many generations and has taken into itself the residue of all those years of cultivation, the composted remains of harvests, and the turned-in stubble of rice straw, and the slow accumulation of everything that a living landscape produces when it is cared for over time. The spade went in, and then it struck something, not a stone, not the particular resistant clunk of a spade hitting buried rock, but something with a different quality, something that gave slightly, something that was not earth. He dug more carefully, and there, beneath the surface, beneath the ordinary dark soil of the ordinary field, were coins, gold coins, a great many of them, more than he had seen in one place in his whole life. He stood for a moment and looked at what was there. Then he looked at Shiro. Shiro looked back at him with the expression that dogs have when they have done the thing they set out to do. Not pride exactly, but a kind of settled satisfaction, the expression of a creature who has completed what it came to complete, and is now ready for whatever comes next. The old man loaded the coins carefully into the baskets he had brought, and carried them home. He did not tell the neighbors. He did not make a show of it. He simply brought what had been given to him into the house, and sat with his wife in the warmth of the evening, and felt a particular quality of gratitude that comes when something unexpected and entirely unearned arrives in your life from a direction you did not anticipate. Next door lived another old couple. They were not bad people exactly, not in the way of people who set out to cause harm, who plan their cruelties in advance and pursue them with deliberate intent. They were simply people in whom the desire for things had become, over the years, the organizing principle of their lives. People who looked at what others had and felt the particular discomfort of wanting it for themselves, who measured their days by what they had accumulated, and their satisfactions by how their accumulation compared to the accumulations of others. They had watched the old man come back from his field with heavy baskets. They had noticed the change in the household, the small signs of improved circumstances, the new things, the quality of ease that settles over a house when financial worry has been lifted. They asked, in the way of neighbors who ask things while pretending not to be asking, "How has it been going? Good harvest this year?" The old man was not secretive. He told them about Shiro, about the morning in the field, the scratching, the digging, the coins. The neighbors listened, and in their listening, there was a quality of calculation, the rapid, almost involuntary calculation of people who hear of a good thing and immediately begin working out how to obtain it for themselves. They ask, "Could we borrow Shiro, just for a day, just to walk our field?" The old man looked at them. He looked at Shiro. Shiro was not a thing to be lent, was not a tool to be borrowed and returned when its use was done. But the old man was the kind of person who finds it difficult to refuse a direct request from someone standing in front of him, and so after a moment, he said yes. The village where the two old couples lived was the kind of village that Japan had in great numbers for most of its history. A small community of farming families in a valley or on a mountainside, organized around the work of the rice fields, shaped by the rhythms of the agricultural year and the relationships that form between people who depend on each other for the work that their survival requires. Rice farming in Japan is not a solitary activity. The management of the water, The elaborate systems of irrigation that bring water to the paddies and control its level through the growing season requires cooperation between neighbors, requires the kind of ongoing negotiation and mutual accommodation that produces, over generations, a particular quality of community life. You cannot flood your field without affecting your neighbor's field. You cannot neglect the shared channels without consequences for everyone who depends on them. The work itself requires more hands than one family has. The planting and the harvest have always been done communally, the village gathering together for the intensive labor of the busy seasons in a way that builds, over the years, the bonds that make a community something more than a collection of separate households. The old man and the neighbor had been living side by side for decades. They had worked the same fields, drunk from the same water, known each other's names since before memory. This is what makes the neighbor's behavior sad as well as wrong. Not just that he was greedy, but that his greed operated against someone he had known his whole life, someone who had been part of the same community, the same shared life. The old stories understand this. They do not place their villains in remote castles or foreign lands. They place them next door, in the house whose chimney smoke you can see from your own window, in the person whose face you have seen every morning for as long as you can remember. The kindness of the old man operated in the same space, not a distant kindness, not the abstract benevolence of a person who is good in general without being good in particular, but the specific daily kindness of a person who treats well the specific people who are actually in front of them. Shiro was in front of him, wet and cold. He brought him inside. The mortar was available. He used it and shared what it gave. The ash was in his hands. He scattered it with care. Kindness, in the old stories, is almost always this simple, not grand, not costly, but present and specific and responsive to what is actually there. The neighbors took Shiro to their field. They pulled him this way and that, impatient, wanting him to find the spot that would give them what they wanted. Shiro did not want to be there. He moved without the ease of an animal in a familiar place, without the settled quality he had when he was in the old man's field, in the old man's presence, and his movements were uncertain, not the confident, purposeful movements of a dog who knows what he is doing, but the reluctant movements of a dog who would rather be elsewhere. He stopped at a place, not because anything was there, not because he had found anything, but because the pulling had stopped and he had run out of direction, and somewhere was as good as anywhere else. The neighbors dug. They dug with the particular energy of people who expect to find something, the digging of anticipation, of greed that has convinced itself it is about to be satisfied. They found nothing, only the dark earth, only the ordinary soil of their field, only the things that are always in the soil of a field that has been worked, old roots, old stones, the quiet accumulation of years. Their frustration turned on Shiro. This is how frustration works in people who have not learned to take responsibility for their own disappointments. It looks for a target, something outside itself onto which the feeling can be placed. Shiro had not given them what they wanted. Shiro had failed them. Shiro was the reason they were standing here in their field with nothing to show for it. What happened next, the story does not dwell on, does not describe in detail, but its consequence was clear. Shiro did not come home. The old man waited. He waited at the door the way he had always waited when Shiro was outside, with the expectation of return, with the ordinary confidence that what had gone out would come back. But Shiro did not come back. And when the evening had fully arrived, and the dark was complete, and still there was no sound of Shiro at the door, the old man went to the neighbor's house and asked. They told him what had happened in the flat way of people who have done something wrong and have decided that the best response to what they have done is to act as if it was not wrong. The old man went home. He did not say anything. He sat with his wife in the quiet of the house and felt the particular silence of a place where a beloved presence had been and was no longer. That night, the old man dreamed. In the dream, Shiro came to him. He was as he had always been, white, entire, the particular white that carried its own light, and he moved with the ease of a dog who is entirely at home, which was the ease he had always had in the old man's presence. In the dream, Shiro told him something. Not in words. Dogs do not speak in words, even in dreams, but in the particular way that dreams communicate things that the waking mind cannot receive, the way of knowing that does not require language, that arrives complete without the mediation of speech. He told the old man, "There is a pine tree at the edge of the garden. Cut it down. Make a mortar from its wood. Use the mortar to pound your rice." The old man woke. He lay for a moment in the dark of the room with the dream still present, still close, with the quality that some dreams have of being more real than waking, of carrying in them a weight and specificity that the ordinary world rarely has. He got up before the light. He went to the garden. There was a pine tree at the edge of it, an old tree, not large, the kind of tree that grows in a Japanese garden and becomes over the years part of the garden's character, the kind of tree that you stop noticing because it has always been there and seems like it will always be there. He stood in front of it for a moment, then he went and got his axe. The pine tree. In Japanese culture, the pine is one of the three friends of winter, the shochikubai, the pine and the bamboo and the plum, the three plants that remain green or that bloom in the cold months, when everything else has withdrawn into the dormancy of the season. The pine is green through winter, not the brilliant green of summer, not the full, saturated green of a landscape at its most alive, but green nonetheless, the particular dark green of pine needles that retains its color when the broadleaf trees have shed theirs, when the landscape has gone gray and brown, and the pine stands in it as a reminder that green is still possible, that the world has not entirely given up its color. In Japanese art, in the paintings and the lacquer work and the ceramics of many centuries, the pine appears constantly as a symbol of perseverance and longevity, of the quality of endurance that outlasts the difficulties of winter and time. The pine in the old man's garden had been there for years. It had grown in the same place through the same winters that the old man and his wife and Shiro had grown through, had been part of the landscape of their lives, in the way that the long-lived plants of a garden become part of a life, growing so slowly as to seem permanent, present in the background of so many days that they stop being noticed the way the familiar stops being noticed. Now, it was gone. The old man had cut it down because Shiro had told him to, and made from it the mortar that had given them the abundance of rice, and the mortar had been taken and burned, and what remained of the tree, what remained of all those years of standing in the garden through all those seasons, was ash, a small amount of gray ash, the residue of longevity, the compressed remainder of all those years of slow growth. And it was this ash, this end product of a thing that had been alive and was no longer, that would make the blossoms come on a bare tree in the cold of winter. He made the mortar, not quickly. These things are not made quickly, but with the patience of a person who has worked with his hands his whole life and has learned that the work goes better when you bring to it the quality of time it requires. The pine wood was good wood, dense and fragrant, the smell of pine released by the cutting filling the small workshop where he worked, the particular resinous smell of Japanese pine in winter that is both sharp and warm, both alive and ancient. He shaped the mortar. The mortar is one of the oldest tools in Japanese domestic life, a heavy vessel, usually of wood or stone, used with a pestle to pound rice, to reduce the cooked grain to the smooth, elastic mass from which mochi is made. Mochi, the rice cake that is central to Japanese celebration, to the New Year and the winter festivals, and the particular pleasures of the cold season, requires this work, this patient pounding, this reduction of something hard into something yielding. When the mortar was finished, the old man and his wife pounded their rice, and the rice, as it was pounded, produced more rice, not a little more, not the small variations that occur naturally in the work of pounding, but genuinely more, the rice increasing rather than diminishing, the mortar filled and refilled by something that should have been exhausted and was not. They worked through the evening. They worked until they had more rice than they could use, more rice than they had started with, more rice than seemed possible from the quantity they had begun. They sat in the warmth of the kitchen with the evidence of this abundance around them and felt again the particular quality of the unexpected gift, of something that could not have been predicted and could not be explained, and was simply, unmistakably there. The mortar and the rice. In Japan, the pounding of rice into mochi is one of the most ancient domestic rituals, a practice that has been part of Japanese life for more than 2,000 years, appearing in the oldest records and continuing, in various forms, to the present day. Mochi is made from a particular kind of rice, mochi gome, glutinous rice, which has a higher starch content than the rice eaten in ordinary meals and produces, when cooked and pounded, the particular elastic, stretchy quality that mochi is known for. The pounding itself, mochitsuki, is a communal activity, traditionally done in the days before the New Year, when families and neighbors would gather around the large wooden mortar and take turns with the heavy mallet, the rhythm of the pounding setting a beat that everyone could feel, the steam rising from the hot rice, the smell of the cooking filling the cold air. There is something deeply satisfying about the process of mochitsuki that goes beyond the food it produces. The physical work, the lifting and striking, the coordination required when two people work together, one pounding and one turning the mochi between strokes, produces a particular quality of presence, of being entirely in the body and entirely in the moment, without the mind wandering to the past or the future. The finished mochi, soft and warm and fragrant, shaped into rounds and eaten with sweet bean paste or soy sauce and nori, has the quality of something that was made with the body and is received by the body, a food that carries in it the warmth of the work that made it. The old man's mortar multiplied the rice, more rice than was put in, more rice than was possible, the abundance that should not have been there and was. This is the story's way of saying that the old man's house was a place of genuine warmth, that the goodness that was in his life produced more than could be explained by ordinary means, that kindness compounds the way that the old stories have always said it does. The neighbors heard about the mortar. Of course they did. In a small village where the houses are close, and the walls are not thick, and the lives of neighbors are visible to each other in the ordinary course of ordinary days. Of course they heard. They asked to borrow it. The old man hesitated this time. The mortar was not simply a tool. It had come from Shiro, from the dream, from whatever it was that persisted of Shiro's presence in the world after Shiro was gone. It was not something he wanted to hand over to people who had not treated Shiro well, but they asked, and he found it difficult to refuse, and so he said yes. The neighbors took the mortar home. They pounded their rice. The rice did not multiply. It diminished, as rice always diminishes when you pound it, reduced by the pounding, made smaller by the work, behaving like rice rather than like something magical. Their frustration was immediate. They felt cheated, not by themselves, not by their own greed and impatience, but by the mortar, which had not performed for them the way it had apparently performed for the old man. In their frustration, they burned it. They put the mortar in their hearth and let it burn, and watched it become ash. Then they told the old man what they had done, again in the flat way, again without apology, the way of people who have convinced themselves that what was given to them was theirs to dispose of as they chose. The old man did not argue. He asked only for the ash. The neighbors looked at the ash in their hearth, the gray, unremarkable residue of the wood that had been the mortar, and could see no reason to refuse. They gave him the ash. It was late winter, the kind of late winter that Japan has in its mountain villages, cold still, the cold that has settled in deeply over the months of the season, and has become the quality of the air itself, present in everything, in the feel of the wood of the house, and the smell of the garden, and the particular quality of the morning light, when it comes low and pale through the bare branches of the trees. The cherry trees were bare. They stood in the cold in the particular way of deciduous trees in winter, without apology for what they had lost, without the appearance of waiting, simply present in their winter form, the form that precedes the form that everyone is waiting for. The old man took the ash. He carried it out into the garden with the particular care of someone carrying something fragile, something that is also precious. The ash that had been the mortar, that had been the pine tree that had grown in this garden while Shiro was alive. He stood beneath the bare cherry tree. He looked at it for a moment, at the branches against the pale winter sky, at the particular quality of bare branches that is not emptiness, but potential, the form of a tree that is full of what it will become. Then he began to scatter the ash. He scattered it the way you scatter something precious, not carelessly, not with the broad sweep of a person disposing of something unwanted, but with attention, each movement considered, the ash rising in a small cloud where his hands released it, and then settling, some of it onto the branches, some onto the dark soil beneath, and as the ash settled, the blossoms opened. Not slowly, not over days, but here, in this moment, in the cold of late winter, in the pale morning light, the blossoms opened, white and pink, the particular colors of Japanese cherry blossoms that people travel from everywhere to see in spring. Those colors, those blossoms, appearing on the bare branches as the ash fell among them, as if the ash had called them up from wherever they had been waiting, and they had come. The tree was covered. Where there had been bare branches and cold air, there were blossoms, hundreds, thousands, the full flowering of a cherry tree in a single moment, in the wrong season, because of an old man with ash in his hands and love in his heart. The village in winter. A Japanese mountain village in the cold months has a particular quality, a stillness that is different from the stillness of other seasons, a slowing down that is not just the temperature, but something more fundamental, a shift in the rhythm of life that has been part of how people have lived in such places for as long as people have lived in them. The rice had been harvested in autumn. The fields that had been green with growing rice through the long summer and had turned gold as the season turned were now bare, gray-brown, the stubble cut, and the soil turned and waiting for the spring planting that was still months away. The work of winter is different from the work of summer. In summer, the rice fields require constant attention, the water levels managed, the weeds removed, the plants watched for signs of disease or damage, and the days are long and full and the body tired in the way of bodies that have done real work in heat. In winter, the fields do not need tending, and the days are short and the light is thin, and the cold keeps people closer to the warmth of their houses than the summer allows. There is time in winter, time for the repair of tools and the making of things and the conversations that the busy seasons do not have space for, time for the particular quality of sitting that is not idleness, but rest, the earned rest of people who have done a full year's work and are now in the season that requires less. The old man and his wife sat together in the evenings of that winter in the warmth of their house. The absence of Shiro was present with them, present in the specific way of absences, which is to say it was not nothing but something, the shape of what was gone still legible in the space where it had been. They did not speak of it much. They did not need to. They simply sat together in the warmth and the quiet and the particular quality of winter that, for all its cold, has a kind of gentleness to it, the gentleness of the world that has put down its work and is resting. Word spread through the village quickly, in a small village in late winter, when the cold has gone on long enough to have become the whole quality of the world, when the memory of warmth and color has begun to feel like something from a long time ago. The sudden appearance of cherry blossoms on a tree is not something that can be contained. People came. They stood at the edge of the garden and looked at the blossoming tree with the particular expression of people who are seeing something they did not think was possible and are adjusting, in real time, their understanding of what possible means. Among those who came was the lord of the district. He was making his winter rounds, the tour of the territory that lords made at this time of year, partly administrative, partly ceremonial, the showing of presence that was part of what it meant to be the person responsible for a place and its people. He saw the tree. He stopped. He had seen cherry trees in blossom before, had seen them every spring, had the particular appreciation for their beauty that any person raised in Japan develops over the course of a life spent in the presence of that beauty. But he had not seen this, had not seen blossoms in winter, had not seen the sudden transformation of a bare tree into something that should have required months more of warmth and time. He asked about the old man. He was brought to the gate of the garden. The old man came out, not nervous, not performing humility, simply himself, the person he had always been, an old man in a winter garden with ash on his hands. The Lord asked him to demonstrate, to show what he had done, to make the thing happen again if it could be made to happen. The old man looked at the bare trees that were still bare, the ones that the ash had not yet reached. He reached into the cloth that held the remaining ash. He scattered it. And again, the blossoms came. Why did the ash work for the old man and not for the neighbor? This is the question at the heart of the story, the question that the story is really asking beneath the surface of its events. The easy answer is, because the old man was good and the neighbor was not. But this is too simple, and folk tales are rarely as simple as their surface suggests. The neighbor was not evil. He was not cruel by nature, or not only cruel, but a person in whom greed had become the loudest voice, the voice that drowned out the other voices that might have spoken differently. He had done wrong things. He had done them because he wanted something and saw a way to get it. This is human, not admirable, but deeply, recognizably human. The difference between the two men was not that one was good and one was evil. The difference was in how they related to what they received. The old man received what came to him with gratitude, not performed gratitude, not the outward show of thankfulness that is really a form of self-congratulation, but genuine gratitude, the feeling of a person who recognizes that what they have was not inevitable, who does not take their good fortune as evidence of their own deservingness, but as a gift from something outside themselves. The neighbor received what came to him, or what he hoped would come to him, as something owed. He had done the things. He had gone through the motions. The treasure should have appeared. The rice should have multiplied. The blossoms should have come. When they did not, his frustration was the frustration of someone who feels cheated, who had expected a transaction and found instead that the world did not work that way. The ash worked for the old man because the old man was not trying to make it work. He was not standing beneath the tree calculating what he might receive. He was standing beneath the tree with the ash that had been Shiro's tree, the ash that was the last material form of a thing he had loved, and he was giving it back to the world the way you give back something that was never really yours to keep. And the world received it and gave back flowers. Let us stay for a moment with the cherry blossoms, with the particular place they hold in the Japanese imagination, which is a place unlike the place any other flower holds in any other culture. Sakura, The word itself has a quality in Japanese that no translation captures, a sound that is both light and complete, both immediate and resonant, a word that carries in its two syllables everything that the flower means. Cherry blossoms bloom in Japan for a very short time. This is central to what they mean. The blooming period is measured in days, a week, perhaps 2 weeks, depending on the year and the weather, and the blossoms, once open, fall quickly, the petals releasing from the branches in the wind and drifting downward in the particular slow way of falling petals that seems to say something about the relationship between beauty and impermanence. The Japanese aesthetic concept of mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of the passing of things, the particular emotion that beautiful things evoke precisely because they will not last, is perhaps most completely expressed in the cherry blossom. You cannot look at cherry blossoms without also seeing their ending. The beauty and the brevity are inseparable. The tree is never more beautiful than in the moment when the petals are beginning to fall, when the bloom is at its peak and already passing. Hanami, the practice of flower viewing, is one of the oldest Japanese traditions, recorded in sources from more than 1,000 years ago, when the aristocrats of the Heian court would gather beneath the blossoming trees to compose poetry and drink wine and attend to the beauty that was available only in this brief window of this particular season. The tradition has continued. Every spring, people in Japan spread their blankets beneath the cherry trees, in parks and along river banks and in temple gardens, and sit with friends and family and food and drink, and look up at the blossoms above them, and feel the particular thing that cherry blossoms make you feel, which is the combination of joy and sadness that is at the heart of the most beautiful things. The old man's ash made the blossoms come in winter, made them come in the cold, in the wrong season, when they had no business being there. This was the miracle. Not just that flowers bloomed from ash, but that the time of flowers was extended, that beauty was made available beyond its appointed season, that the cold and the bare were briefly, impossibly, made warm and full. The Lord's procession had stopped. This was not a small thing. The stopping of a Lord's procession was not a casual event. It meant that something had interrupted the ordinary business of power, had inserted itself between the Lord and his destination, with enough force and novelty to make the destination temporarily irrelevant. The Lord was a person of considerable rank, the kind of rank that, in the Japan of the old stories, placed a person in a relationship to the world that was entirely different from the relationship of ordinary people. He moved through the landscape attended and protected, the center of a structure of obligation and ceremony that organized everything around him in relation to himself. Beauty was available to him in ways it was not available to ordinary people. The most skilled artists worked for him. The most elaborate gardens were his. The finest food and music were part of the ordinary texture of his days. And yet the blossoms on the bare tree stopped him. Not the beauty of prepared things, not the beauty that had been arranged and cultivated specifically for his pleasure, but this, an old man in a winter garden with ash in his hands, and blossoms appearing on branches that should have been bare. The surprise of it, the impossibility of it, the way it arrived from outside the ordinary arrangements that governed his life, from outside the structure of rank and ceremony and preparation, arrived simply, without announcement, in the cold air of a winter morning in a village he was passing through. He rewarded the old man generously, not because the old man had done anything for him personally, had not built him a garden, or composed him a poem, or served him in any of the ordinary ways that people of lesser rank served people of greater rank, but because the old man had shown him something that could not be arranged or purchased, the particular beauty of what happens when the world responds to genuine kindness with something that goes beyond what kindness can logically produce. He gave what he had to give, and the old man accepted it with the same quality of gratitude with which he had accepted everything, not grasping, not performing, simply receiving what had come. The neighbors had watched all of this. They had watched the blossoms appear on the tree. They had watched the people come. They had watched the Lord arrive and stop and look and call for the old man, and reward him with the gifts that lords give to people who have done something that has genuinely delighted them. They had watched the old man go back into his house with more than he had come out with the recognition and the reward that had come from the ash, from the mortar, from everything that had begun with Shiro in the field that long ago morning. They still had some ash. Not much. The old man had asked for all of it, and they had given him most, but some, a small amount, saved without quite knowing why, kept back in a corner of the hearth with the particular logic of people who save things, not because they have a use for them, but because they cannot quite bring themselves to let them go. They would try. They had nothing to lose. The ash was ash. The mortar was gone. Shiro was gone. All of it was already gone. And the Lord was still in the area, still making his rounds, still available to be impressed. They went out to find a tree. They found one. A bare tree in the cold. An ordinary tree. One of many in the village that was waiting for spring in the patient way that trees wait. The neighbor stood beneath it with ash in his hands. He scattered it, not with the attention of the old man, not with the quality of care that the old man had brought to his own scattering, but with the impatience of a person who wants the result and is going through the motions of the method. The ash scattered. The tree remained bare. No blossoms came. After the blossoms in winter, after the Lord's procession had moved on, after the neighbors had attempted and failed, after the rewards had been given and accepted, spring came. Real spring, the spring that arrives on its own schedule, without the help of ash or miracles. The spring that comes every year, that has always come, that will continue to come with the reliable regularity of the earth's turning. The snow in the mountains melted, and the water came down into the valleys and the fields. The soil warmed, slowly, degree by degree, the warmth working its way down from the surface into the deeper layers where the seeds were waiting. The seeds knew. This is what seeds do. They wait in the dark, with a specific sensitivity to the conditions that will allow them to become what they are. And when those conditions arrive, they respond. The cherry trees blossomed again, not because of ash this time, not because of any human agency, but because it was spring, because the accumulated warmth of the lengthening days had reached the threshold at which cherry trees bloom. The blossoms came in the way they always come, gradually, the buds swelling over days, then opening, slowly at first, and then all at once, the bare branches filling with the particular pink white of sakura in full bloom. The old man stood in his garden and looked at the cherry tree that he had scattered ash on in the winter. It was blooming again, not because of the ash now. The ash had done its work in winter, but because spring had come and the tree was alive, and alive things bloom when the conditions are right. He thought of Shiro, not with the acute pain of fresh grief that had softened over the months, but with the particular quality of missing someone who has been gone long enough that the missing has become part of the texture of ordinary life, present but not overwhelming, a thread woven through the days. The blossoms moved in the spring wind, petals fell. The old man watched them fall and thought, this is what was given. This is what Shiro brought. Not just the coins, not just the rice, not just the winter blossoms, but this, the spring, and the blossoms, and the particular quality of standing in a garden and watching something beautiful, and knowing that the world is, in its way, generous. Let it all soften now, the small village in the cold, the white dog in the morning field, the spade going into the dark soil and the coins appearing, the dream, the pine tree in the garden, the smell of the mortar and the rice that multiplied, the ash in the old man's hands, the bare branches of the cherry tree, the blossoms opening in the wrong season, in the cold, because of the quality of what brought them there. Let it dissolve gently, the way ash dissolves into the air, rising in a small cloud and then settling, becoming part of the surface of things, invisible but present, the way everything that has happened remains present in the places where it happened. There is something in this story for sleep, not the lesson, not the moral, but the quality of the old man himself, the quality of someone who moves through the world without calculation, without the constant background assessment of what each thing might yield, without the exhausting arithmetic of advantage and disadvantage that occupies so much of the waking mind. He simply did what seemed right when it seemed right to do it. He gave when he had something to give. He received what came to him without grasping for more. And the world around him, the coins in the soil, the rice in the mortar, the blossoms from the ash, responded to this quality in the way that the world sometimes does, in the stories that the cultures of the world have always told themselves about how kindness works. Tonight, let your own calculations rest. Let the assessing and the planning and the working out wait until morning, when they will be available again, patient as ever. For now there is only this, the cold air of a winter garden, the bare branches against the pale sky, the ash rising and settling, and then the blossoms, unexpected, impossible, entirely real, opening one by one in the silence of the late winter morning, filling the cold air with what spring had promised and winter had kept until now. Rest well, sleep well, good night.